Right, well, with that welcome, we better not mess it up, had we?
I've just realised two things. I've just realised, firstly, I've got the muddiest shoes in the world, and I've also realised that I'm wearing Minion socks. Bottom. Did I not dress myself? No, I know, but I just didn't think about it at the time, anyway.
Or get a grown-up to do the same.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. There are a few people coming in and squeezing in the last couple of seats. And thank you all for making the In Conversation series such a success. You're most welcome. When I was a student here, one of the philosophy professors that some of you will remember, Frank Cioffi, an American, we discussed aesthetics and the role of a critic. What is a critic for? What is criticism for? And it's always stuck in my mind that he was very, very helpful. He said, a critic's role is to transform your experience of the work. And that is one of the many reasons that I really enjoy working with Mark. I first came across him reading some of his stuff and then hearing him on Radio 5, and then finally we managed to get him to come on to television as well to do a weekly film review show. And what I most like is he does transform my experience of the work, and he does so by making judgments, but not with necessarily an attitude before he goes into the cinema. That's at least how I see him. So please will you welcome our guest, Mark Kermode.
Thank you.
I'm never normally that nice.
No, I know, and I'm slightly thrown, actually.
Anyway, to business.
Yes.
Can we start at the beginning? How did you? What are your first memories of seeing films? Was it something on television? Was it actually in the cinema? I mean, what do you remember first that said this is something important for me?
I remember very clearly the first film I can remember seeing in the cinema. So it may not have been the first film. But the first film I remember seeing in the cinema was Krakatoa East of Java. And I was taken to see it by my mum, and the really weird thing, I don't know whether any of you have seen Krakatoa East of Java. It was quite a big film when it came out. The thing that everybody knows about it is Krakatoa isn't east of Java, it's west of Java. So it's one of those great mistake film titles. But so the weird thing was, so I saw it as a kid, and I loved it, and it's, action and adventure and balloons and, volcanoes and sea and all that sort of stuff. But the weird thing was, I just had this really weird little memory of a scene in it that seemed to have nothing to do with volcanoes or balloons or sea, and it was weird. I remember it as being a woman in a corset, seriously, singing a song to a bloke who appeared to be lying on a bed in a state of drunkenness or something. I remember I was a kid when I saw it. Anyway, so I hadn't seen the film for ages and ages and ages, and when I was writing my first book, I went back to see it, because one of the things that I tend to do is I tend to misremember things a lot. I misremember films that I've seen. I misremember scenes from one film being in another film. So for ages, I thought that there was a sequence in Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which I'd seen a trailer for Battle for the Planet of the Apes, in which one of the apes said to the other apes, "But I want to love you now." And right. And then I saw Battle for the Planet of the Apes, and that scene isn't in it. I mean, it isn't in it. And it really troubled me, because I kept waiting for the moment where I think it's Kim Hunter who plays Zira, I think it was. And it never happened. And I got this absolute solid memory of seeing it. And then one day, later on, I saw Cabaret, the Liza Minnelli film. And there's a moment when Liza Minnelli turns to, your man, and she says, "But I want to love you now." And I realised that what had happened was I had seen a trailer for Cabaret and a trailer for Battle for the Planet of the Apes next to each other, and I'd transposed the bit of her doing it to Planet of the Apes. I mean, to this day, I can see the scene with the apes. But, so to cut long story short, so I went back to see Krakatoa East of Java again on DVD by this point. And I was watching it, and I didn't remember it. And there were scenes in it, I had no memory of them at all. And then suddenly, there is indeed a weird musical sequence in which suddenly, out of nowhere, this woman sings this song about I'm an old-fashioned girl and I want an old, not that old, but it's basically a version of that song, whilst her partner is sort of lying drunken on a bed. And it's a musical sequence. And I did not remember Krakatoa East of Java having a musical sequence in it, except for the fact that the only thing I could remember about it was this woman singing this strange song to this bloke. So it did happen. I don't know if that answered your question. So that's how I remember Krakatoa Eastern Drive, and that was my first cinema experience.
It definitely answered another question, which I didn't ask, but that doesn't matter. Yeah. And it also explains why you say your favourite film is The Exorcist, when, of course, it's probably Bambi then, by that kind of logic.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. No, but The Exorcist has been my favourite film since long before I saw it, because when The Exorcist came out, right, The Exorcist came out 73 in America, 74 here. So I was born in 63, so I was 10, 11 when it was coming out here. And many of you probably aren't old enough to remember, but when it came out, it was a really big deal. I mean, it was absolutely, it was a news story. It was all these stories about people fainting, people passing out, people being carried out of cinemas. I used to go to a cinema in Hendon called the Classic in Hendon. And I remember going to it, and it was a 3-screener, which was what then passed for a multiplex. And I was going to see something else, and it was probably like Towering Inferno or something. And The Exorcist was showing on one screen, and nuns were standing outside the cinema, sprinkling holy water on people going in. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you weren't terrified before you got there, by the time you were in the cinema, I mean, and then there was St. John's ambulance brigades outside. But I'm not making this up. This is true. I mean, people were literally passing out and being carried out of the cinema. And I remember thinking, this must be the greatest film in the world, because it's actually, it's having this reaction, because I was far too young to see it. And back then, they did used to be stricter about certain X films. I mean, there were certain things they didn't care about, but The Exorcist was one of those films that if you didn't look 18, they probably weren't going to let you in to see it, because there was such a lot of fuss about it. So for 5 years before I saw it, I read the book, I read the making of the thing, I read magazine articles about it. By the time I finally saw the film, I'd seen the film in my head, and then I saw it, and it was better. It was even better than I'd imagined it to be, but I've never been so scared in my life as I was the first time I saw it. And I thought, this is absolutely brilliant. It is sublimely terrifying.
Ian Rankin, who was here a few weeks ago, said that basically he wanted to do a PhD at Edinburgh University because he thought that it would be a really good idea if the government would pay him to write his first novel. Very good. I'm summarising, but that's roughly what he said. Did you want to do a PhD so you could spend a lot of time watching film?
I mean, yes. The short version, that is what happened. I was at Manchester University, which I loved, and I was never very good academically. I didn't get good O levels. I didn't get good A levels. I got rejected from Manchester University 3 times, I think, and I took a year out, and then I finally got into Manchester through clearing. So I arrived at Manchester with a massive chip on my shoulder, which I've always found is a very good thing. And then as an undergraduate, I was solid low 2-1, 2-2 I was in that kind of area. But what I was annoyingly determined. And I back then, if you wanted to do a PhD, the British Academy was. Linda, I do mean the British Academy, you're fine. Sorry, my wife is a professor and actually holds half of my memory. And the British Academy would fund you to do things. And as far as I understand, it was at the point that they had suddenly started to demand that if they put money into somebody doing a postgraduate thing, that they wanted a thing at the end of it.
That's shocking.
I know,
shocking.
but because a lot of people were starting PhDs and not finishing them. That doesn't happen now, incidentally, but it did used to happen. And as far as I understand, the university said to the BA, well, he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he will finish. And they were right, and I did. And what happened was that in those 3 years that I was in Manchester, I started working for City Life magazine, which was a workers' co-op, which was brilliant. So everybody got to do everything. We had the Corner House Cinema, which was, showing all this sort of really diverse art house fare. We had the Arban Cinema in Hume. We had 2 what then passed for multiplexes, the screen 1 to 5 and the screen 6 to 9. And so it was brilliant. You had enough to live on, and I was writing my thesis on horror fiction, which is what I loved anyway. So in that period, I mean, it was such a privilege. I mean, education is such a to have been given the opportunity to do that was such a privilege, and it was great. And I grabbed it with both hands. And being in Manchester at that period when City Life was happening it could not have been better.
We've got quite a lot of questions that people, and thank you for it, have tweeted or sent us by email and so on. But just before we get to those, at the point at which it became a job,
yes,
Is there, when you go to, when you go to Cannes and sometimes
I don't go to Cannes.
You don't go to Cannes?
Not anymore. No.
You don't go to
Cannes.
Cannes
No, my
anymore.
motto
Why?
is can, don't.
All right. Well, when you go to, I'm not sure where,
No,
but
sure.
A film festival where there are a lot of films, some of which you haven't seen because they're new films, and you may have to see 3 or 4 in a day. Do you do that? And do you not get jaded by the end of the day?
Well, actually, that's a very interesting question, and it raises two different things. So generally, the circuit I'm on now is what's called the National Press Critics Circuit. So I'm a weekly critic. So every week I do Radio 5, I do You and I Do, BBC News 24. BBC News, whatever it's called now.
I think it's called Krakatoa East
Yeah,
Java.
yes. And then I write the weekly film reviews for The Observer. So I tend to see films in the week that they come out. And the way that it works is you have screenings on Monday and Tuesday. And on a Monday and Tuesday, you'll see 3 or 4 films back-to-back each day. So it'll be 10:32, 4 and 6, 10:32, 4 and 6. And then actually nowadays, because the way that the release schedules work, there may be up to 13, 14 films released in any week, and so for the other ones, you try and catch them on, screeners, or they'll send you a link to watch it online. So generally, you watch 10 films a week, and you generally watch those 10 films in the space of 2 days. Now, actually, that's because it's like anything else. It's like a job. You get into the rhythm of it, and it's not the case that don't they all blend into one, because no, they don't. Because if anyone's doing a job, like if they're working in a law firm, or one case doesn't bleed into the other. It's very easy. I mean, you're a news presenter. One news story doesn't bleed into the other. But I'm sure that people say to you, don't they all just kind of become? But they don't. Festivals are a different thing, and one of the reasons why I just lost the plot with Cannes. And I really did lose the plot with Cannes, quite spectacular. I ended up getting thrown out of a screening of... I've told this story before, but it's true. I was at the screening of Lars von Trier's The Idiots. And the problem with Cannes is it's an absolute bun fight. You have to getting into the screenings is nerve-wracking. And then people are by the third day, people are tired. People have, they're rattled. They're watching things out of context. They don't know what's going on. Everyone's aggressive. My feeling is that under those circumstances, your judgment is shot. There are people who can make good judgment calls under those circumstances, but I'm not one of them. And I was in a point. I'd gone there for Radio 1, and I was on a blue pass, which meant you were sort of slightly down from you were like at the very bottom of the path. Anyway, short version of the story is it was the screening of Lars von Trier's The Idiots, and I didn't like it at all. And there was this sort of, I could feel this critical, stuff going on. And then suddenly there's this sequence in The Idiots, for no reason at all, that I could tell, which is suddenly hardcore porn. Which, and what happened was, there was this ripple went round the crowd. Oh, bravo, well done. Marvellous. I just thought, I can't stand this. And I stood up and I shouted in very bad, I failed my French O-level twice, got it third time round, and I went, il est merde, il est le plus grand merde dans le monde entire. And after that, I didn't go to Cannes anymore.
Right, well, that answers that question. Look, we have got so many questions, and perhaps we can get some from the audience as well live. But just let's pick up on that thought. There's a number of questions about the Oscars, and I could sum them up by saying, the Oscars, are they rubbish or not?
Yes.
Right.
The thing is that for me, that's nothing new about saying that. I started this the Culture Show, which was on BBC Two for a long time, and we started doing this thing on the Culture Show. I think it was about 10 years ago now, and it was as a joke, because I always used to say the problem with the Oscars is that the Oscars are not representative of anything at all. They just aren't. If you look at the history of the Oscars, and you imagine that somehow what the Oscars do is celebrate the best in cinema, then you'd probably give up watching movies. I mean, we just spoke about this briefly before we came on. Famously, what won the Oscar for Best Picture the year that Citizen Kane didn't? Okay, does anyone know? All right, How Green Was My Valley? Perfectly fine film. Is it Citizen Kane? No. Okay. What won the Oscar the year that The Exorcist didn't win the award for Best Picture? The Sting. Perfectly fine. Was it the best film of the year? Absolutely not. What won the Oscar for Best Picture the year that Saving Private Ryan didn't win?
No idea.
Shakespeare in Love. I mean, you know, and what won the Oscar? What didn't win the Oscar the year that Driving Miss Daisy did? Everything that was released in the world. So there's this really weird idea about the Oscars being, you know, and we have a problem with it with the British film industry, is that if a British film does well at the Oscars, it's like, hey, the British are coming, and then there'll be an Oscar nominations when there aren't. Oh, it's the British film industry is in crisis. You cannot judge the success of your own cinema, or indeed worldwide cinema, by the Oscars. Now, obviously, right now, there's this really, really big issue about diversity, or more correctly, the lack of diversity. And it's not just to do with race. It's to do with, like, for example, you look at the Best Director category. Well, what a surprise, they're all male. You know, the fact of the matter is, it took the Academy 80-something years to give their Best Director prize to a woman, which is Catherine Bigelow for The Hurt Locker. I mean, how likely is it that for the first 80 years, every single best film of the year was directed by a man? Statistically, how likely is that to be true? Answer, not at all. No animated film has ever won the Oscar for Best Picture. No film in any language other primarily than English has ever won. It's like the issue of diversity goes so far through the Oscars. And I think it's very good that people are raising it now, because there's no question that it's a problem. But just before the Oscar nominations were announced, The Observer did a thing in which they asked some of their critics, me, Guy Lodge, Catherine Showard, to say who they thought should win the Oscars, and who they thought, what films should be recognised. Well, I mean, for me, it was the Best Director should have been Celine Sciamma for Girlhood, which incidentally I know was eligible for the Oscars. I checked; it was one of the 305 titles that opened in America and was put down as an eligible title, and I guarantee you that not one of the Oscar voters had seen it. Best Actress, Courage Toure, who was so fantastic as the lead in Girlhood. Supporting actor Idris Elba for Beasts of No Nation. We were all choosing these things, so believe me, when the Oscars thing was announced, we just all went, yeah, well, so it's business as usual. So it is a problem, but I think the problem is absolutely endemic in the Academy's way of looking at movies is so narrow. I mean, as a film critic, you're very lucky. You get to see a really wide range of movies. But when you look at what the Academy vote for, you can't imagine that they've actually seen that wide of a range of movies. In fact, I would suspect that what happens is they look at what gets nominated at the Golden Globes, and then they go. So the Golden Globes becomes the unofficial first round of the Oscars.
But the lack of diversity is also in the people who are making the judgments.
Yeah, it is.
Rather than the people that they're judging.
No, absolutely. And if you want to know what a bunch of mainly white, mainly over 65, mainly men think are the best movies of the year, then go ahead. It's just don't think that it makes any difference to what's actually the best movies.
But why has that completely failed to change? I mean, Ava DuVernay, who directed Selma, great film, African-American woman, so she is in two categories which are significantly underrepresented. I think it's 7% of Hollywood directors are women, something like that.
Yeah, and in Britain, it's, sorry, because my wife's working, but what's the percentage in Britain, love? Right, so better in Britain.
Slightly better. And I said to her once in an interview, how many African-American women directors are there working in Hollywood? And she said, we could all have lunch together and fit round this table. Yeah. So there's three or four.
Yeah.
But how do you equate that with, there's also been a discussion that we've had before, which is lack of great parts for women. And yet this year, there are some films which are nominated for Oscars in various categories where there are fantastic parts.
Yeah, there are, and I think that's
Brooklyn,
in a way,
Carol, etc.
Yeah, but that in a way, or a film like Debbie Tucker Green's movie Second Coming, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. Again, which Idris Elba was great in, and Nadine Marshall was so great in, and that British Home. I mean, that really, really smart movie. Again, had no chance of getting noticed at the Oscars. The problem is therefore twofold. The problem is, one hand, from the industry's point of view, the industry needs to diversify. But then the second tier of that is what the Academy tends to look at is not representative of what's done in the industry. It's a very, very small portion of it. The very fact that there is a phrase, an Oscar movie, you know, critics use that. They go, it's an Oscar movie. What does it mean that that even exists as a phrase? That there is such a thing as an Oscar movie? It means that this is what, you know, I mean, I'll give you another example. Leonardo DiCaprio is going to win the Oscar for Best Actor this year, okay? You can bet your house on it. Don't, incidentally. Just, right, as a, you know, born and raised a Methodist, betting bad, evil, please don't do it, okay? If you do, it's not my fault. Leonardo DiCaprio is going to win the Oscar this year.
I
okay?
think the Bear's going to win the Oscar, personally.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You do know the bear's not real, don't you? I keep telling you this. The bear is a CGI bear.
You'll tell me Superman can't fly.
But why is he going? Why? No, Superman can fly, but why is he going to win? Well, there's two reasons. Firstly, it's his turn. Okay? It's absolutely his turn, right? He didn't get nominated for Titanic, but he's been nominated 5 times before, and everyone gets his turn. Okay? Secondly, it's the Oscar-winning performance. He grew a beard and got really cold, right? That's, I mean,
fair enough. It worked for me.
I mean, I think he's really good. I think he's really good. But that's what an Oscar-winning performance looks like. There is a certain type of performance that wins Oscars. Oscar voters like you to have suffered, and they like you to have grown a bit. They like you to speak so they can't quite understand what you're saying.
Oh yeah, ticks that box.
You know, and they particularly like the story that he genuinely had to eat a bison's liver. You know, that was inside. What I love about that story is the way that they've sort of played it as, oh, well, we don't want to talk about this. But did you know he really had to eat a bison's liver? You know, that's the thing that's going. Oscar voters ate a bison's liver. His turn, right?
Let's change the subject entirely, because we've got a question here. Actually, this is from the Gulbenkian, the University of Kent Arts Centre, asking about films, family films. They'd ask you to select 4 films for the 2016 Boeing Festival. 4 films all the family can enjoy.
4 family films?
4 family films.
Well, obviously Mary Poppins, because... Why does that even get a laugh? Okay, here's the thing. Mary Poppins is one of the 10 greatest movies ever made, and if you don't think that's true, those are the doors. Okay? I mean, it's just one of those. There are very few films that I think, you know, actually, you divide people. These can be my friends, and these can't be my friends. But you're either in the Mary Poppins camp or you're not in the Mary Poppins camp. It's brilliant. It's timeless. It's, you know, the songs are wonderful. The story is fantastic. Julie Andrews is absolutely perfect, practically perfect in every way.
Dick Van Dyke?
Yes, he's great. And don't start up about Dick Van Dyke's accent. Because, you know, I mean, for a start, there are British actors who do worse Cockney accents than that. Which we won't go into. And you know, and even on a special effects level. So the sequence in which they go off into the dream, into the chalk, the chalk pavement, it's brilliant. I mean, I've watched that sequence so many times, trying to figure out where the joins are. It's just, on a technical level, it is absolutely brilliant. It is just wonderful. It never fails. I loved it when I was a kid. I love it now. I'm 52. There was a year of my life when my daughter was young, and it was one of the very first feature films she watched. And I put it on under the excuse of she'd probably want to watch it. And, you know, and then we must have watched it 3 or 4 times a week for a year. And by the end of it, I realized that it was Citizen Kane. You know, it was the best. So that definitely. Dougal and the Blue Cat, which is just a really, I don't know whether people have seen it, it's the Magic Roundabout feature film, and it's really strange. It's genuinely, it's like Jan Svankmajer in its weirdness, and it works fabulously. And I had it as a kid, I had an MFP album of the soundtrack, you know, Eric Thompson doing the whole film, and although this Fenella Fielding does some of the stuff as the Blue Voice. And I played, this is in the age before video, I saw the film and I loved it, and I just listened to the soundtrack album over and over and over again. So I learned all the dialogue off by heart. And I can now recite the entire film from the beginning to...
Right, well, moving on.
I'm not going to... And then I'd say, well, Tale of the Princess Kaguya, because actually we talked about this recently, which is just so wonderful, the Isao Takahata film, and it's, I mean, it's this brilliant demonstration that in an age in which animation is so much now to do with 3D and CG and everything, that you can have hand-drawn animation that will take a timeless tale like that and make it work for such a wide audience. And it's so beautiful, it's so sumptuous, and you can just get lost in the animation, and I think anybody could see and love that film. And then I'll go for Inside Out, which I thought was the film that actually should have won the Oscar for Best Picture this year, but of course didn't even get nominated Best Picture because the Academy don't give the Best Picture award to animated features. They just don't. And yet, I've seen that 3 or 4 times, and every time I've seen it, I've been completely knocked out by it. And I think it works for young and old alike, and I think it's a really profound movie. And I think in 50 years' time, it'll be a pub trivia question. What won the award for Best Feature the year that Inside Out didn't?
That's interesting, actually, because one of the questions that came in is, what film have you watched in the last 5 years that you think will be held up as a classic in 20 years' time?
I do think Inside Out will. I genuinely think it will. And I think that people don't like to say, an animated movie is their favourite film of the year because they think it seems trivial. I don't understand this, because animation is so obviously one of, if not the most exciting areas of cinema. And, in terms of invention, in terms of diversity, in terms of, you're living in a world now in which we've got stop frame animation, we've got CG animation, we've got hand-drawn animation, there's so many different types of animation. And yet people still have this kind of strange, snobbish attitude towards it. And yet we have no problem with looking back and saying, well, of course the early Disneys are classics. Of course they are. Well, that's what Pixar are doing now. That's what Ghibli have been doing. That's what the Hayao Miyazaki films are like. Those are all absolute stone cold classics. So I think Inside Out will be the one that in 5-10 years time people will really still hold up as a classic.
And to return to the subject of your socks, Minions is a great watch.
I loved Minions.
It's a great film.
I love Minions. And one of the weird things we were talking about Twitter before. I don't know whether any of you do Twitter, but one of the best things about the internet is everyone has access to it. And one of the worst things about the internet is everyone has access to it. And people would send me these messages. I can't believe you said that the Minions movie was good. You should be fired. Just go, I laughed. Like you laughed too, right?
I loved it.
Yeah, it's
absolutely
genuinely funny.
Genuinely funny.
And proper slapstick. I love slapstick. I love slapstick comedy. And so much of what the Minion stuff was about anyway was to do with silent comedy and and silent film. And I do find that stuff right. I find physical comedy funny.
Anybody like to ask some questions from the floor? We've got plenty that we could talk about, but anybody like to have a go? Yeah, there we are. We've got a microphone for you, and then there's one up at the back as well. So, gentleman there.
It's not too loud, is it?
There you go.
No, not too loud.
Well, it's just that it's interesting that you've hinted at an anti-establishment attitude towards film, in a sense, with the anti-Cannes and the Oscars. I was just wondering what part you think maybe the over-immersion in celebrity culture affects the finer qualities of filmmaking, say, or the feeling about an attitude towards film?
Well, look, the fact of the matter is that certainly in terms of Hollywood cinema, celebrity culture has always been a part of it. We are very given to thinking that it's a new thing. But all it is that the way in which the control of it is done has changed. It used to be that you had actors and actresses would sign up for contracts with studios, and the studios would then micromanage their image. And the way the studios worked with the newspaper outlets was very, very kind of intertwined. Now there's at least the illusion of something other than that, but it is still the same function, which is that you have a personality that you're selling publicly, and that's always been. And the fact is that there have been decades of absolutely brilliant Hollywood films made. So I don't think that celebrity culture is any better or any worse now than it has ever been. What I think, however, is that the best thing about being a film critic for me is you get to see pretty much everything that gets released. And the first thing you realize if you start doing the job, on a working week level, is that the sense that everything out there is blockbuster, superhero, celebrity-led movies simply isn't true. What it is that those are the things that make the noise. So in any week, if I see 10 films, yeah, there will be those movies, but there'll also be a film from Japan that I'd never heard of, a strange Latvian animation that I knew nothing about. And those are the things that actually are the real treats. And Barry Norman once said this thing, and I think he's absolutely right. I love Barry Norman, incidentally. I think he's a real proper cineast. And he once said that in any given year, the number of good and bad movies is probably the same. The only difference is the amount of attention those movies get paid. And what I've discovered over the years of doing, because I've been doing the national film thing for a while now, is that it's really just a matter of trying to reshift your focus. It's not that cinema is now overrun by celebrity Hollywood blockbusters, although there are a lot of them. It's that there's everything else. Dustin Hoffman said last year, he said, cinema is the worst it's ever been. In the 50 years that I've been working, I'm quoting him. Obviously, I could do his voice, but I can't. He said, in the 50 years that I've been working so much, it's the worst it's ever been. And I thought, that's just such nonsense. It may be that in the 50 years that you've been working in a very rarefied area, it's not great. But you're saying that in the year that Carol Morley's Girlhood came out. You're saying that in the year that Celine Sciamma's, Carol Morley's The Falling and Celine Sciamma's Girlhood, and, the Isao Takahata came out, and, all these wonderful movies. When I was trying to do my 10 best films of the year, I was trying to get it down from a list of 30. So the stuff is out there. It's just that the attention is paid to the celebrity stuff. And it's very easy to avoid that. You just avoid it. I mean,
I'd just like to say I'm pleased you enjoyed your stay in Manchester, as that's my home city.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it was wonderful. I was really lucky to have got in there. I really loved it.
Now, there's somebody up the back. I should say that Mark also propagandizes for those kind of films that we don't see. In fact, he came up to me once and he said, "This is the best South Korean film you'll see this week."
But it was.
And it was.
It was. And actually,
was.
I mean, I should say that we do try and do this on the film review slot that Gavin and I do. We do try, and because if you've got 7 minutes to talk about films, and you can make one of those films something that it will make a tangible difference, and it's not because of what I say about it. It's because it's a couple of minutes of television in which people are just aware that, oh, there's a film out called The Assassin that he was saying it was quite good. Maybe we should look. That's the way it works. And one of the nicest things about doing that slot was somebody came up to you who had made one of those smaller films and said that actually that they thought that it had brought a few people in as a result of it being on the film. That's great. That's absolutely great. So if there is any purpose to what we did, it should be that. It should be that if you're doing a film review show, it shouldn't just concentrate. We have the right to choose what we do, and we shouldn't just choose the 3 big Hollywood blockbusters. What you should do is try and diversify.
There's somebody up the back. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, my voice is quite loud. I just want to change direction a little bit with the question. I wondered what you think, how you think the role of being a critic has changed in kind of an online world of blogs. And how you think people could potentially get noticed, I guess, in a oversaturated market?
It's a really good question, and a part of the answer to it is that I wrote a book about this. I know, and in a way I'd like to say thank you very much for me being able to tee up. I wrote a very interesting book about it. It's called Hatchet Job. It's available in paperback now. Anyway, there was when I started writing Hatchet Job, I had this kind of, because I come from old school journalism, from City Life magazine, when we would physically put the magazine together. Like we would literally physically, you'd have boards up and you'd write the stuff and you'd put it into a typesetter and it would come out and then you'd stick it with spray glue onto a page, which was then sent off to be photographed and turned into a magazine. I remember very clearly, there was a guy called Andy Lovett who used to edit with a scalpel. And he once said this thing, he said, "This review's too long." I said, "How long?" He said, "About 3 inches." And he went like that. But as a result of that, you were in an environment in which you were surrounded by other journalists, and in my case, much better journalists. So Andy Spinoza, Ed Glynott, people who were really, really sort of cutting-edge grassroots journalists, all of whom went on to have very, very good careers. Then I went to Time Out, in which my editors were Jeff Andrew and Brian Case. And I remember writing a review and then seeing them go through it and doing this with it, and it was very much like what a tutor would do if you were doing a thesis or something, you know, saying that doesn't work, this, you know, you have to signpost this, that doesn't make any sense. Brian Case did this thing once. I wrote a feature and he literally came up and stood in front of me and tore it in half and went, there, do it on that. And it was, so I learned from that. Now, when it comes to blogging, you can go from, you know, from nowhere to published like that. And on one level, that's great because it means that, you know, you haven't had to go through all these other areas. But there is a problem with that. Firstly is that you lack editing. And I'm not saying you lack editing because maybe you're a brilliant writer already. But I tell you, from where I'm standing, editors are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Everything that I've ever written that has been any good at all is good, if it is good, because of an editor. You know, when I was writing my thesis, my PhD, Linda, my wife, who's a professor of film, literally went through it like this, and I, you know, and going, that doesn't make sense. This doesn't work. When I went to time out, that's what happened. And over the years, you start to learn. Now, with blogging, the problem is that you don't have that, and I think that it's something that most people could benefit from. That said, if you can get a blog out there, it's great because it's good to get attention. But the problem is everybody else can get their blog out there as well. So how do you make your voice heard above everybody else's? And I honestly think, having written Hatchet Job, but at the end of Hatchet Job, I'd completely changed my position. I think the answer is that the conditions are still the same. The people who are writing blogs on the internet, who are getting attention, are doing exactly the same work that the old school classic film journalists, Philip French, you know, Peter Bradshaw, those people are doing. They write well. They describe the film accurately. They spell people's names right. They are able to put the film in context in a way that is readable, and then they add their opinion to it, and they are honest about their opinion. And if you look at like Stuart Barr, who's an online journalist, or Chloe Catchpole, who's somebody who I know, who sort of came to me and was asking for advice about writing, started writing a blog, but is now a paid journalist. She's now got a paid. The thing that defines them is exactly the same as what defined good film criticism in print. The rules are still the same. You have to describe the film accurately, you have to contextualize it, and then you have to add your opinion in a way which says, this is just my opinion. I mean, you know, but you have to be honest about your opinion. I think in the end it doesn't. Plus, everyone is a blogger now. I write a column for The Observer. The minute The Observer is printed, it's online. So everyone is writing online anyway. And I do genuinely think that there are as many good online journalists as there are print journalists, but the ones that are doing well are the ones that would have done well in print anyway.
Thank you. Some more thoughts. There's a lady over there.
The other day on 5 Live, during your review of The Hateful Eight, you said that what Quentin Tarantino might need is a collaborator to sort of reel him back in from writing loads of stuff that actually doesn't need to be in the film. I was wondering who might be a good collaborator to do that with him.
You know, that is a brilliant question. My feeling about Tarantino has always been that what he needs is to be in a room with a producer standing over him with a very big stick going, 90 minutes, you know? Yeah. And when you, but he makes money, and then everybody's scared to do that. Yeah, but it's not just that he makes money. It's that Harvey Weinstein described Miramax as the house that Quentin built, and then he described the Weintraub organization as the house that Quentin rebuilt. And because, you know, Tarantino's movies have done well for Weinstein, who's a very, very important producer, and consequently, Tarantino has earned the right to not have anyone standing over him with a big stick. And my feeling has always been that people do their best work when they're having to fight for, there's an old rule, which is that the first thing you do with a film is that incidentally, I've never made a film in my life, nor could I. So just to be clear about this, I'm not telling other people how to make films because I couldn't do it. But there's so many filmmakers say this thing, that you make a film and the first thing you do is get your favorite scene and take it out. And see whether the film works with it, okay? So we see whether the film works without it. And then go through the whole film and take every single scene out. And don't put it back unless the film doesn't work without it. You know, it's the thing about cut your lovies. Cut everything down. Less is more. And I genuinely believe that Tarantino's best work, Reservoir Dogs, which was made in very, very little money, very tight circumstances, and then Jackie Brown. Now, Jackie Brown is actually a long movie. Jackie Brown is the best part of 3 hours, but it needs to be. It's the right length. Does The Hateful Eight need to be the best part of 3 hours? Nope. Hateful Eight is a 90-minute movie. I mean, it is demonstrably a 90-minute movie. You're 35 minutes into the film before they arrive at Minnie's haberdashery, right? That's the beginning of the movie, that they arrive at Minnie's haberdashery. But it's, for me, I think that the thing that frustrates me about Tarantino is that I think he is talented. I think he is smart. I think his knowledge of cinema is vast. And I think he could and can do great work. He just doesn't. And the reason he doesn't is because he's surrounded by people telling him he's brilliant. And what he perhaps needs to be in a situation of is being surrounded by somebody who's not telling him he's brilliant. But, why on earth should he listen to me? He's doing very well and he's a critic and, But you've seen Hateful Eight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's too long?
Yeah.
How long? How much too long?
There was loads of it that could have been taken out
Yeah.
at the start, and some of it towards the end. I think Samuel L. Jackson's bit could have been cut down quite a lot as well.
So basically, you're talking about half the film, right?
Yeah, just the beginning and the end.
Yeah, there's a really good 95-minute movie in there.
In there somewhere. Yeah, and then the lady down here.
Hi, just to say first, I'm a very big fan of the podcast.
Thank you.
And also, I was wondering, which films are you most looking forward to this year, that are coming out this year?
I get asked this, and the answer I'm going to give you, this is absolutely true. It is not, I'm not making this up. I genuinely don't know, because what I genuinely try to do is to not know what's coming up. I had a sort of Pauline moment some years ago when I thought that actually what a film critic should be doing is knowing what's in the pipeline and being at festivals to see everything first, And then I kind of had this, well, why? Surely the thing you should do is watch the films as and when they come up. And why is the first review of anything good? I mean, there is this weird thing now with newspapers. First review, first look, the film finished playing, Star Wars finished playing 5 minutes ago and here's our review. First but wrong most of the time. I'd rather be last but considered rather than first but wrong. So I genuinely have tried to stop doing. Now, there are times anyway, like we do blog about what's coming up in the next 2 or 3 months. And I mean, I know, for example, that Dad's Army movie's coming out because I know Toby Jones, so I know that's happening. And I know that there's a new Captain America movie coming out because there's been trailers for it everywhere. But beyond knowing that they're coming out, I genuinely, and I tell you, the thing I'm most looking forward to is the thing that's the third screening on a Tuesday after I've seen 2 superhero movies and something else, which is a film I've never heard of, which I know nothing about when I go in and see it, and which will end up being movie of the week because, one of the best cinema-going experiences I ever had, ever, was seeing Audition, the Mika Takashi film, which I saw in Edinburgh with Trevor Johnston, who is incidentally one of the best film journalists writing in this country. I mean, I read that man's writing and I want to weep because I will never be that good. And his wife is Japanese and he was learning Japanese, right? So he said, we're going to go and see this movie. It's playing at the Edinburgh Film Festival. I said, what do you know about it? He said, I know it's Japanese. That's it, right? So we go in and we sit in this film and it starts out as a romantic comedy. It starts out as this funny little quirky romantic comedy about this guy who can't get a date. And so he sets up an audition as if he's producing a film to audition people to come along and meet him. And then 25 minutes, it turns into the shriekiest horror film you have ever seen. Trevor and I were hiding behind the seats in white-knuckle terror because we had no idea where this film was going, and it was brilliant. And when I reviewed it, I half wanted to say, I don't want to say anything about this film, just go see it, because it was absolutely fabulous to see it, having known nothing about it.
There's somebody down here.
You as a film critic, if you had the power, what would you change in the film industry?
Well, I think the answer to that question is film critics don't have the power, and I think it's a really good thing that they don't. I want to be really clear about this. The reason I'm a film critic is not because I'm a failed filmmaker, okay? I couldn't make a film. I have no desire to make films. I like to watch. That's what I do. I'm like Peter Sellers in, in Being There or whatever it is. Yeah.
Being There.
And I think the worst thing is film criticism which attempts to tell people how the film, how they should have made a film. I mean, we've all written those reviews, and I'm as guilty of it. I'm doing a part of it, but I'm saying, Tarantino needs somebody standing over him with a big stick. It's just not me, incidentally, but somebody who knows what they're doing. The film critic's job is not to change the film industry. The film critic's job is to respond honestly to what there is there. Filmmakers should not make films for critics. They shouldn't pay any attention to critics. They probably shouldn't read reviews. I think film critics should not, in an ideal world, should not be friends with filmmakers, because the two disciplines are completely different. And I'll give you an example of that. I was very good friends with Ken Russell, who was a neighbour of ours, and we were very close. And as a result of it, I could never look at any of Ken's films. I mean, I loved his work before I met him, but once I met him, I could never look at any of his films without knowing how much I loved Ken. So even when he made some frankly unwatchable shorts, you were still looking. I mean, if you've ever seen A Kitten for Hitler, that's a film that's hard to love, but So my answer would be that my wish would be that critics don't have any influence on how films get made. The only influence I think they should have is possibly flagging up the existence of a diversity of cinema for audiences. Audiences make their own decision about what movies they like, they go and see. But what critics do is they happen to tell you that this film is out or that film is out, and it's a good way of being a shop front. And then after that, all we're doing is just doing what we're doing now, is discussing films. That's it. It's not the critic's job to make films better.
There's somebody up there, and
because we'd make them worse.
Somebody up there and somebody down there.
Hello, massive fan of yours. I was just reading through Hatchet Job, your book that you mentioned earlier, and
I think it's a marvellous bargain at $8.99.
My girlfriend bought it for me at Christmas. Actually, she bought me the other one as well, The Movie Doctor.
I would definitely marry her.
I think we'll have to speak to your wife about that.
No, I wouldn't marry her. I mean, just to be clear. No, not that I wouldn't. That's not it. That sounds like a criticism. Okay. Let's start this again.
I think you should stop
the face
digging.
has gone back to normal colour. Of a million questions I'd like to ask you, one would be, I run a film and music review show on the very radio station that runs out of this university every Sunday night. And in short, do you find that you go into a review entirely prepared, and then you run away with yourself and you don't fit everything in? Or do you find that you've structured it now over the years you've been doing it, and you find it very easy to get out exactly what you wanted to say?
Well, okay, that's a really good question. What happens? The way it works is, you're talking about with broadcast film reviews, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, the way it works for me is this: I see films on a Monday and Tuesday. I write the Observer column on Wednesday. Then I spend Thursday trying to make the Observer column better, and trying to think, how would Trevor Johnson have written this? By the time I get to Friday, when I'm doing the show with Gavin and the show with Simon, I have thought through what I think about the films. But what I then try and do is, there are certain sort of key things that I think are important in the sort of condensed version of that. But I have spent some time thinking about it from writing. Yeah. And then I just talk about them. So actually, for example, that Entourage thing, which ended up being as long as it was, that wasn't planned. That absolutely was not planned. Right. It's just, I just got that cross about it. Or when I was talking about Room, for example, just the other week, I mean, I had written the review of Room, and I found myself halfway through reviewing it on the radio. I suddenly thought, I'm going to burst into tears. I'm not being funny about this. I genuinely thought I'm going to start crying, and that's really not going to help. But you can hear that that's not. I mean, I hope you can hear that it's not put on. I mean, I wouldn't. That's not a stunt. So what I do is the preparation is the writing. The preparation is the writing the review, and then I'm talking from that. So when I was doing before, when I wasn't doing a weekly film column, what I would do is I would write a review, even if it wasn't to be published. I would write it in advance. It's like if you do exams, you tend to write stuff down because it gets it into your head to remember. Yeah. And then you talk about it. So it is a mixture of, but it's not scripted. It's absolutely not scripted. I mean, you've heard the program. You can tell it's not scripted. When Gavin and I do the film review, I'll have a sheet of paper which has got the names in front of it, because you always live in fear of that thing about suddenly going directed by, and then you go blank, okay? Now, actually what happens is, if you have a piece of paper that says Lenny Abrahamson, Brie Larson, Jacob Tremblay, you don't need to look at it, because you know it's there. But if you sat there without a piece of paper, you would suddenly get that thing about going blank. And the other thing is this. Yeah. You see this all the time, and people say, "What are you doing?" I'm not doing anything. I'm just. This makes me think I'm thinking logically. So literally, I'll be talking to Gavin, and I'll just be doing this. I'm just writing absolutely nothing. I'm not doing anything of any consequence, but this somehow makes me think that it's making sense.
We've only got a few minutes left, Mark. Just
sorry.
No, just... no, you're not
Brevity.
Quentin Tarantino.
No,
I'm not
exactly.
cut 20
I
minutes.
need a producer standing up with a big stick.
But just a couple of other questions that have come in. One is, the experience of watching a film, and it links into something you said earlier, when you see it on the big screen, or you sometimes see it on a smaller screen, on a screen or whatever. I mean, do you find that your judgment changes? Revenant, I think, is one that we touched on recently about that. That's quite a good example.
Revenant is the perfect example. So I saw Revenant on a BAFTA screener disc, which I think you did as well. And I have to say, the first time I saw it, I was not wowed by it. I thought it was okay, but, you know, because that story, to some extent, is familiar because of, you know, Man in the Wilderness, and also because it is an archetypal survival narrative. And I thought it was solid, but not much more than solid. And then I talked to Nigel Floyd, who had seen it in a cinema. And actually, Nigel and I, although we disagree about a lot of things, we do sort of respect each other's opinion. And he said, what do you think? I said, well, it's not Apocalypto, which is the Mel Gibson film, which is unbelievably visceral. I mean, whatever you think about Mel Gibson, Apocalypto is a really, really visceral film. And Nigel said, you saw it on a screener, didn't you? And I said, yes. He said, you need to see it on a big screen. You really do. And I said, well, you know, I'm busy, but okay, fine. So then I went to Fox and I saw it at Fox, and it was a completely different experience. I mean, it was absolutely, well, okay, fine, this makes sense to me now, because all that Emmanuel Lubezki camera work actually only works when it's that far, you know, and it's all around you. Watching it on the small screen, it looked, I have to say, rather tricksy. It looked, if anything, sort of, oh, you know, you're doing that in one shot, that he's on the thing, and then he's on the horse, and then he's on the... But when you saw it in the cinema, it was a visceral experience. Another film that I would say that was true for is Gravity. Mm-hmm. You know, Gravity does work to some extent on a small screen, but it's not the film. You're not getting that experience of, you know, of floating in space with Sandra Bullock and, you know, and all. So there are some films when it absolutely makes a difference, but I think The Revenant is really a case in which you have to see it on a properly big screen to understand what it is that it's doing.
And one other thing which I kind of alluded to at the start, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, just when I read your columns, or when we talk about films, while you dislike some films intensely, Entourage, for example, you tend, it seems to me, and I don't know if you have this in the back of your mind, why I like reading your stuff is you tend to tell me the things that I should get off my backside and go out and see. Whereas rather than, you know, you can be, other critics can be quite snide about films and tell me what I shouldn't want to see or don't want to see. I mean, do you think that that's part of your job, to say, this is the best South Korean film you'll see all week? You know, this is something that's worth making the effort.
Yeah, I think two things about it. Firstly, I think it's very kind of you to say so, because I am very conscious of the fact that, you know, I have a reputation for, you know, for going off about films that I don't like. And the really odd thing is that you can slag off a film like Sex and the City 2 and everyone remembers. And then you can go on for, you know, exactly the same amount of time about why it is that something like Dance of Reality is, you know, this great, and nobody notices. And it's a really weird thing that people remember the bad reviews and not the good ones. One of the reasons is I think that the bad reviews are funnier. And I think that, seriously, I think that's actually the case. I mean, you know, I walk down the street and I'll be talking about Dance of Reality, and it's, you know, Alejandro Jodorowsky, and it's fantastic, and I'll be going on about, and I'm walking down the street and somebody goes, Saw that Sex and the City the other day. And whenever it's on television, people tweet me, watching Channel 5, Sex and the City, lol, So that, and every now and then you start to think, God, that's it. That's the only thing. But what you actually want, and I also think it's part of just, getting older, is that when you start out doing it, you do realize that there's a certain pleasure, and also, which can be a cheap pleasure, in really kicking the life out of something. That's why, one-star reviews tend to get attention. They do, because people like to read a real savage kicking. But actually, if your job is to have any purpose at all, it ought to be to flag up the stuff which is interesting. And in the end, what it comes down to is it's a simple matter of space. So, for example, like in The Observer tomorrow, I led on The Assassin, the Who Tsai-Chan film, which I really loved. And, and I led on Second Coming, the Debbie Tucker Green film, and I led on The Falling, and I led on Girlhood. If there's any positive purpose to what I'm doing, it's that those reviews are that big, and the other reviews are this big, and so therefore people will just... And I really do think that it is something that, as a critic, you'd want to be known for. I am also very aware that I'm less known for that than I am for slagging things off. But then again, I'm equally guilty of it because, I've written several books, and some of them have had lovely reviews. Can't remember any of them. I can remember every word of the bad reviews. I can quote them for you verbatim. And so it's, I know from the other side, that's how it works. But if, and you're not just saying that to be nice, and I think you're probably not, if it is that... No,
I'm not nice, no.
No,
right.
What I mean is, I genuinely appreciate it. If what happens is that that does flag something up for you as being interesting, then that's the thing I'm most proud of. Because that's really the thing, if there is any good in what you're doing, that would be it. It would be... it comes back to this argument before about somebody, and back to the Oscars, back to everything we've been talking about. Everything is out there. It's just to do with where you manage to shine, to shine a particular light. When Pete Bradshaw leads in The Guardian on a smaller release foreign language film, it probably has a tangible effect on that film's UK box office. He's probably the most influential critic in terms of flagging up a foreign language release that people might not have heard of. Whatever else he does, he's very famous for writing very vitriolic one-star reviews because he's a brilliant writer. I mean, he is. He writes really well. But it's the leading on the slightly more esoteric stuff that is actually the meat of what he's doing. And you ask any film critic worth their salt. I mean, Philip French was always the same. It's difficult. I took over from Philip French at The Observer, and I learned a really important lesson. I'll pass this on to you for nothing at all. If you're going to take over a job from somebody, take over from somebody who was rubbish. Right? Don't take over from somebody who was genuinely considered to be the best at that profession in their English language. Somebody who, when they stood down, The Observer ran 6 pages of tributes from every single major filmmaker currently working in the industry, including one from Martin Scorsese that used the word irreplaceable.
On that happy note, I think Professor Chaffee would have been rather pleased. I think you do transform our experience of the works. Mark is going to sign some books outside. I'd like to thank him on behalf of all of us for a great talk. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good.